Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Until Dawn 2 was recently announced, and it has an all-new cast, all-new setting, and people seem generally excited for it. However, I have been feeling a little weird about it. It doesn't really carry the same vibe, in my opinion, that the original Until Dawn did. It doesn't really feel like a sequel to Until Dawn, and that's because it kind of isn't. So, in this week's video, I'm going to discuss the original plans for Until Dawn, as well as why Sony and Supermassive Games split up. But first, we've got to do some background on the first Until Dawn, and how it came to be. Until Dawn released in 2015 for the PlayStation 4, exclusively. It follows a group of friends reuniting years after the death of two of their friends. They're isolated in the middle of winter in a cabin in the woods, and the sort of slasher supernatural hijinks that you would expect ensue. I've actually covered Until Dawn on this channel before. I've covered the cut content and some of the original plans for it, but I'll quickly summarize here. It was developed by Supermassive Games in partnership with Sony. The interesting thing is that it was originally meant to be a PlayStation Move title for the PlayStation 3. Eventually, the game was reworked into the much more narrative and cinematic experience that we know today that released exclusively on the PlayStation 4, and it was a major hit. If you're curious about the early versions of Until Dawn and the differences between the story and the casting decisions, I highly recommend you go check out the previous video that I've done on this. The game would go on to be a massive success, in part thanks to its massive popularity on YouTube, with many different Let's Players playing the game. I mean, that's how I had initially heard of it. I believe it was either Markiplier or Jacksepticeye's playthrough that caught my attention initially.
Best thing to shout at the top of your lungs outside of a cabin door. Break me off a piece of that, Kit Kat bar.
And of course, like any other part of the entertainment industry, whether it's movies or television, if something does well, you're gonna want sequels. And sometime after, Sony began funding a prototype for Until Dawn 2. Now here's the thing. Supermassive was not owned by Sony. I know it's fairly common nowadays for larger companies to purchase smaller studios and sort of assimilate them. Xbox does this all the time. But this relationship was a little different. It was more of a loose partnership, a collaboration. Sony wanted a specific type of game, and Supermassive used Sony's vast resources to create that product for them. And Sony retained the rights to Until Dawn and any spin-offs or sequels that may come of it. All that to say, Supermassive was not limited to exclusively working with Sony. So, in the meantime, Supermassive started something called the Dark Pictures Anthology series. These are a series of choice-based games that began release in 2019, starting with Man of Medan. These releases would continue fairly regularly for a couple of years, the most recent of their releases being Directive 8020. Of course, while this is a series, as I mentioned, it's an anthology, so none of them are directly connected. They are not all sequels and might not even be set in the same universe, although I'm sure there's some theories or some deep lore that actually does connect them all. The way that they're all connected is through a narrator, which takes you through each one of them. These games have performed fairly well financially and critically as far as I can find. Most of them sit within the 69 to 72 range on their Metacritic scores. And I feel like if they were financial failures, we wouldn't have gotten so many over the course of these years. See, the thing is, according to recent reports, it seems that Sony was rubbed the wrong way by the fact that Dark Pictures was released on multiple platforms, including PC, PlayStation, and PlayStation's biggest competitor, Xbox. So what does that have to do with Until Dawn and its supposed sequel? Like with everything, there's two sides to this story and even a secret third option. So I will go through each of them and kind of leave you to decide. According to TimeExtension.com, whose original article I will have linked in the description, they were interviewing members of Supermassive in relation to an investigation they were doing about their workplace culture. They got a quote from one employee that said, "The Quarry team was originally Until Dawn 2, working with Sony, and Sony basically paid for them to be making this for them as a prototype. Then, once the prototype was done, Supermassive turned around and said, we're gonna shop this around and see if anyone else wants it." According to this employee, it was Supermassive who cut things off with Sony, basically saying that they wanted to continue trying their hand at multi-platform releases like their Dark Pictures series. Now, this next quote is slightly different and offers a version that claims that Sony was the one who actually ended things. They said, "The Quarry started as a pitch for Until Dawn, but they didn't have the license. They burnt their bridges with Sony by releasing the Dark Pictures on multiple platforms. As far as I'm aware, someone else has that license now." So as I said, there's two different sides to the story. On one hand, you could see it as Supermassive gaining confidence in themselves and their product, and ultimately cutting ties with Sony after seeing what they could do with multi-platform releases. And Sony really couldn't do anything about this. And with them sort of being miffed about them releasing the Dark Pictures anthology on multiple different platforms, they really didn't do anything to try to keep them around. They just said, okay, do what you will, we'll find someone else to make Until Dawn Part 2. On the other hand, you could see it as Sony becoming bitter at the success of Supermassive and deciding that, hey, you've burned your bridges by going and working with our competitors after we've done so much for you and fully funded this prototype. Just take it, do what you will with it, we're done with you. It kind of just comes down to your opinion on things. So no matter what side you believe, it's clear that according to these sources, one way or another, Sony's dislike of Supermassive releasing games on multiple platforms, combined with Supermassive wanting to take things in a different direction, ultimately led to the disintegration of their relationship. And what of this Until Dawn 2 prototype? Well, initially Google entered the picture and wanted it to release on Google Stadia. Then they backed out, and then 2K entered, which led to the Quarry that we got today. And I think that's really interesting that the Quarry, according to these sources, was initially an Until Dawn sequel and would have just been called Until Dawn 2. I think it makes a lot of sense. In my opinion, Until Dawn and The Quarry share a lot of DNA. Of course, they were written and directed by the same people and developed by the same company, but I mean in terms of the tone and the style. Both of the games have an 80s horror movie vibe, each of them taking two different tropes. Until Dawn takes the cabin in the woods trope, and The Quarry takes the summer camp trope. And both of them deal with supernatural forces that alter your body and change you. There may even be a world where there is a more clear-cut connection between the werewolves in The Quarry and the Wendigos in Until Dawn. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but in my mind it makes so much sense that The Quarry was initially Until Dawn 2. However, this may not even be true. According to Will Biles, who directed and wrote both The Quarry and Until Dawn, "I am the writer and director of Until Dawn and The Quarry. The Quarry was written as a standalone game, and Sony paid nothing to its development. It was originally being made for the Google Stadia." I think this is one of those things that we'll never truly get an answer on, because on one hand, what motivation would these employees have to lie about the relationship between their company and Sony and the development of the game? But you could see it as, I don't know, maybe somebody wanting to capitalize on the recent buzz around Until Dawn 2. It's kind of up in the air, it's still alleged. On the other hand, what reason would Will Biles have to lie? The only thing I could possibly think of is, I don't know, maybe there's some sort of contractual agreement between Sony and Supermassive about keeping Until Dawn plans quiet, or keeping certain things about development of their games together quiet. But once again, that is all speculation. This is all alleged. This is just a possibility, and this is just new information from a couple of quotes that have surfaced that I think is really interesting, and I think it's worth a consideration. The current iteration of Until Dawn 2 is slated to release sometime in 2027. I'm really interested in what you guys think of that. Does it feel like an Until Dawn game, or does it kind of just feel like a story-based game that happens to have the Until Dawn logo slapped on it? My other question is, what do you think of the fact that The Quarry may have originally been Until Dawn 2? I don't know, I think it's really interesting. So before I leave you, I just want to ask, if you like what you saw, please like and subscribe. I don't really ask that very often, but I'm putting a little more effort into videos lately. I have some big plans in the future for higher effort videos that actually have like skits and things like that, vaguely like what I did in No, I'm Not a Human. So I'm just asking, if you like what you see, please stick around. I also have socials linked in my description. So thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you, and I hope you have a good morning or evening or a, whatever.